Hi there guys, it's Connor from Jam Ltd here. I'm the writer for the project, and today I'm going to be talking about how the second chapter to the series Tales of Dusklight was created, how I went about including sound, writing, constructing, everything involved in the process, just to give you a little bit of a deeper insight into how these kind of things are done.
Chapter 2. Beneath the Rubble.
For those that don't know, Tales of Dusklight is an audiobook series that features the events leading up to the City of Dusklight's construction. Now, each chapter follows a different character, and these characters all link in with each other in one way or another. I won't reveal too much information about the story, but definitely check it out. It's really cool. If you're interested in the world of Dusklight and if you're excited for the main game, it will certainly help you going into the main game, knowing all of this information before, and will just make for an all-round more enjoyable experience. So I wanted to explain a little bit about sound and how sound can help aid narrative in an audiobook form. So more specifically, and quite obviously, in times of tension, for example, having sound effects and Foley in there, which kind of help aid that sense of thrill or rising threat, albeit ambience or more localized sounds like gunshots or footsteps or breathing, and there's a lot of that in that second chapter. But we really think that having this immersive audio that accompanies and complements dialogue or narration can really help you be immersed in this sort of sonic form. The format of sound effects and Foley in audiobooks is definitely a thing. It has been done before, but we were always surprised at its lack of abundance in the audiobook market, if you will. So when I was creating the second chapter, I was really surprised and really taken aback by how much sound can actually aid and does aid sort of narrative complexities or certain moments within that narrative. We've had a lot of people asking more about the world of Dusklight, wanting to know a little bit more about the story. Well, this will definitely help alleviate some of those concerns or worries or questions. So this series is an in-depth look into how the city was created, how it was constructed, who are the key players, and all in the frame of an audiobook, fully casted, fully narrated, with sound effects and Foley to help immerse you into the experience.
Steady, she thinks, trying to control her breathing, quietly backing into a corner. Thick layers of trash scrape and tear with each step taken as she backs away from the shining doorway.
So firstly, I'm going to talk a little bit about the methodology behind a lot of the sound implementation and creation. So sound design, as far as sound design is concerned, I source my sounds in two main ways. I either, collected loads of different things, different objects, and recorded them using a simple microphone setup, or I use sound libraries or free, royalty-free YouTube samples. So the first one, sound design using objects yourself and recording them, that's really good because it gives you a lot more manipulation over the kind of the trajectory or the envelope of the sound itself. So you can kind of really tailor, custom make those sounds more specifically to how you had them in mind, as opposed to sourcing sounds online which are already set as far as maybe how long they last or what materials, etc. So there are advantages and disadvantages of both. The first one is certainly more fun, and it really gives you that kind of like feeling of bespoke sound design. But the second one is a lot better for workflow. And, if there's high quality samples that are exactly what you need out there already, then why wouldn't you take them? The audiobook actually, this chapter features over 300 individual sounds as well as ambiences. So ambiences might be a bit of background wind, or maybe some sewer sound, dripping in the corner, or an eerie sort of industrial layer that's really quiet and underneath, and that really helps depict space and really helps put you sort of in the position of the protagonist. For example, the sewer section in the second chapter, which is really dark, eerie, you have that sort of sense of mystery and thrill in there. The sewers were constructed to be very haunting and very scary, and part of, how I did that was by using ambiences, background, distant ambiences, distant noises, and then more sort of upfront localized sounds like heavy breathing and footsteps. Another example, which kind of contrasts in a good way with the sewers, is actually a scene that precedes the sewer scene, where the protagonist has just rappelled down her sort of rooftop hideout. She's landed on the ground and she's walking through the empty and desolate streets of a post-apocalyptic world. So something that I did.
After navigating ruptured roads and raining glass, she sees an opening to the metro.
In that clip, you'll be able to hear a car horn and her footsteps, some distant rustling, and all of these tiny little layers that can feed into your overall perception of the sound space. They really help heighten and strengthen that sense of immersion and sense of you being there. Now, there are scenes that require a little bit more sort of upfront, in-your-face sound design for the more action sequence, style scenes. So we have an array of gunshots and fully casted voice actors, shouting and giving commands. We've got some scary ghoul sounds that you'll hear in a second. I'll play that clip. So the importance of this, you can go from really quiet, discreet ambiences to really all of a sudden upfront, in your face, super abrasive, super action oriented sounds like gunshots and shouting and screaming. And this kind of sense of dynamic sound is really important. So if you think about a narrative, for example, that's ever fluctuating in terms of its suspense and building tension and then releasing tension. And the sound in many ways directly correlates to that sort of narrative arc, if you will. So, in times of low tension, in times of kind of denoting a little bit of exposition, we've got some nice sounds in there that gives you a nice sense of space. But then she descends down into the sewers and, runs into the many dangers of the dark. And, funnily enough, as that becomes more thrilling, exciting, then the sound needs to accompany that. So little ways I've done that is automating volume for ambiences, they get a bit louder, as well as the introduction of the sounds that are associated with characters and ghouls and environment. So that sense of dynamic and fluctuating narrative is really, really very heavily complemented by the fluctuating and dynamic sound design in the piece. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about the way that sound was implemented as far as processing and mixing was concerned. So it's very important when you're thinking about spatial sound, which is what we use. We use binaural audio, which is kind of the stereo evolved in the sense that it gives a more exciting and accurate sense of space. And obviously we're trying to construct a space using sound. So one thing to consider, and I guess it's the main one really when you've got a lot of heavy sound assets in there, is you need to be able to hear the narration. You can't have that narration being drowned out by sounds, especially gunshots, which you'll hear in the chapter. So space really helps free up room for certain sounds to kind of breathe. So for the gunshot scene, I won't reveal too much, but for the gunshot scene, we have guns on the right, kind of combatants on the right, and then some ghouls on the left. Now, these sounds are kind of crossing over left to right, but the narration is actually monoed out dead center. So Alessandra, who narrated the piece, she has plenty of space for her voice to be heard. Now, there's other little things we can do, like side chaining, which is very simple. You side chain one sound to another. The sound that is side chained ducks and lowers in volume as the other triggers. So as Alessandra speaks, the sound of the gunshots lowers, and then when she stops speaking, in the gaps that, in between sentences or words, that sound comes back in. So not only have we got space, but we've also got dynamic compression, we've also got side chaining, which is working to kind of give room to everything in the mix and in the space provided.
Bullets whiz and sear through the air, knocking the ghouls and tearing flesh from body. All she can see is glowing eyes drop and fade, while muzzle flash fills the opposite end of the chamber.
Distancing and depth is one main attribute to binaural audio and creating a sense of space. Realistically, you have things that are far away, they're really close, left, right, up and down, and binaural audio really helps to kind of strengthen that sense of space and certain sound positioning. One very simple way of making a sound distanced or very far away is frequency information. You can alter frequency information using an equalizer, so heightening or lowering certain frequency ranges, and of course using a reverb, an ambi-reverb. So imagine being stood at one end of a tunnel, someone else is at the other end of a tunnel. When they say something, that sound is very heavily reverbed or echoed, as you may have heard it called. So one way that we can kind of replicate that is by using reverb in a DAW. Ableton is what I use to record everything and mix everything. So kind of using little techniques like that really give a more accurate and believable sense of space and distance, which really, really helps with the immersion elements, as opposed to just using stereo.
Ventilation shafts pose little room to breathe. As she struggles, squeezing through tight gaps, desperate for an exit, her mind wanders onto what this facility holds.
The main processing tool that I used is a binaural panner, which is Sennheiser's Ambio Orbit. So what that allows me to do is to really position things quite accurately, or as accurately as binaural allows, by having your azimuth, which is this field here, this plane. So whether it's kind of, in front of you and right, so if somebody's walking, for example, and they're walking past, you can sort of automate the plugin so that the azimuth plane, the sound along the azimuth plane is going around your head, for example. So in sequences where you have thoughts whizzed around a head or something, you can automate the recording of the thoughts literally whizzing around your head. So if you're sat there and you're listening to the audiobook, you can really get the sense that these thoughts are in head and whirling around, which is really cool, which is very cool.
We're here for the secret of starting again. The call to iron.
So the Sennheiser Ambio Orbit spatializer also allows you to deal with reflections. Now, these reflections only really work well in sort of closer environments and tighter environments. There's a scene, for example, where the protagonist crawls through vents. Now, in a vent, it's obviously there's a lot of reflections everywhere. It's usually metal as well, so very hard surfaces. So these reflections are quite abrasive and sort of in your face. So you can automate those reflections to be like really hard. So if you're crawling through, it's quite loud. It's because the signals are bouncing off everywhere and back obviously into your ears. So that's one thing that the Spatializer plugin deals with very well. But for distance stuff, an ambiverb or a normal verb perceptually actually works very well. So the reason that we use binaural audio over stereo, for example, are pretty much all the reasons that I already talked about. That sense of higher spatial accuracy, So if you were to close your eyes or simply just listen in a very busy environment, you can hear things are, quite far away or close, left and right, and more importantly, up and down. And binaural does a far better job than stereo does in denoting space. So if we want to give you a really immersive, sort of sound field, a really immersive sound experience whereby a person is moving through an environment, then binaural audio wins every day over stereo for certain things. So I mentioned earlier about ambiances. Some of those ambiances were actually just left in stereo, so essentially just left and right. I wanted those ambiances like wind or sort of eerie sewer sounds or ventilation sounds. I wanted those to be quite present and quite constant for the listener. So having those in stereo just helps to sort of have that kind of foundational layer there. And I felt that it didn't need spatial accuracy, because if you're abseiling down a building, wind is going to be all over, and you can sort of have a stereo ambient file, and you can just sort of widen that, and that is perceptually fine. That's perceptually fine, effective. So in short, binaural audio really helps the listener to be immersed in a space, in a constructed space, using sound and only sound to denote that space. Distance and depth, height, width, everything that we hear in real life and how we hear in real life, binaural audio seeks to replicate that. So we really wanted to give you a very immersive listening experience, and one that you can really kind of be involved in and be placed in a position that is far more effective than just imagining or by being told, or sound design in stereo. Binaural audio, it is the audio system to use or the audio type to use for immersive listening. So that wraps up the section about the methodology and a little bit about binaural audio. I hope you guys enjoyed that. If you have any questions, please do get in touch, and I'll be happy to teach any of you or give you some more insight, more in-depth insight into how some of that stuff was done. So the second chapter is available now through our website. It is on the shop in the same area as AudioPong. Really want you guys to experience this, really want you guys to listen to this. It is super fun. If you like audiobooks, if you like sounds and sound effects, then you will love this. It's a perfect combination of narrative, spoken word and sound effects. So it's, again, a very immersive listening experience, very exciting, really dynamic, constantly changing. The protagonist is constantly on the move, so you really feel like you are the protagonist. And that is something that I've always felt is lacking in film, and understandably so, but film or maybe radio plays, is that you don't generally feel like you're actually there. With this series, we want to put you at the forefront of what the protagonist is experiencing. You, in essence, become the protagonist here. So, as I said, it's available through the website. Please check it out. It's super fun. If you want to get an idea of what it's like, listen to the first one on YouTube. We'll link everything below. That one is free. That one is about half of the sound design and length as the second one and the future chapters to come. So if you want to really be put in the place of a protagonist and really enjoy listening to audiobooks, please check it out, because you will not regret it. Okay, thank you very much.